Something massive just happened in the Blake Lively case, and no one saw it coming. The courtroom is on edge, the filings are explosive, and Wayfair's legal team has just dropped a response that could completely turn the tables. This isn't just another motion. This is the one that could decide everything. And from what's inside these pages, Blake's entire legal strategy might be about to crumble, right before the judge's eyes stay tuned. Because what you're about to hear changes everything. The tension in this courtroom drama has never been higher. And as the clock ticks down, every move, every motion, and every filing feels like a chess piece sliding into place in a game where one wrong step could destroy it all. Blake Lively has asked the judge for more time, a delay, a moment of breath before facing the storm. But Wayfair's fierce legal mind, Kevin Fritz, isn't letting her off the hook. His words are sharp, precise, and relentless, slicing through her arguments like paper. And when he responded to her letter motion, the entire tone of the case shifted, because instead of backing down, he called out everything that had been quietly building behind the scenes. He reminded the court that timing matters, but truth matters more. And he laid out in exacting detail why her delay made no sense under the law. He explained that a judgment on the pleadings isn't a surprise move. It's a right that can be used after the pleadings are closed, and that it doesn't vanish just because months have passed. Blake, he said, is wrong about the timeline, wrong about the delay, wrong about the argument itself. And as he dismantled each point one by one, the atmosphere around this filing began to change, because the way he framed it, it wasn't just about legal deadlines, it was about responsibility and awareness. He pointed out that Blake chose to file her second amended complaint not once but twice, that she made the strategic decision to reshape her claims, and by doing so, she reopened the door for this exact kind of motion, and the irony is that she knew it. She was told about it on the record when the Wayfair team warned that they might file for a judgment on pleadings if she went down this path, but she moved forward anyway. Now she says she needs time to respond, but Fritz isn't buying it. He tells the judge that if she's unprepared now, that fault lies only with her, because every deadline, every requirement, every procedure has been clear since day one, and yet she didn't follow them. What's even more striking is the way he exposes the foundation cracks in her claims, that her right to sue documents were never properly attached, that she didn't include the state or federal permissions required to even bring her case before this court. He points out that in order to sue under the California Civil Rights Division, or under Title VII, she needed to have received a right to sue notice from the proper agency, and that she didn't attach it to her complaint. Not once, not even after amending it. He walks the court through each step, explaining that the complaint must clearly show when she filed her charge what it covered, and that it matched the people she's now suing. But none of that exists on record. It's missing, absent, gone, and that absence isn't small, it's catastrophic. Because if she never had the right to sue, then the entire case may never have been legally allowed to begin. And this is where the courtroom electricity builds, because Fritz isn't just making a technical argument. He's implying that from day one, Blake's legal foundation was built on sand. He highlights that when she filed her first complaint, she included the "It Ends With Us" movie defendants, but she didn't have a right to sue them at that time. She simply added them in, and that can't be fixed after the fact. It's not a typo. It's a fatal procedural flaw. And according to federal law, if she wanted to fix it, she had to notify both the court and the defendants. But she didn't. And so the motion to dismiss now has teeth, because the entire case depends on the legitimacy of those filings. And while Blake's team might argue that her federal claims give her jurisdiction, in New York, Fritz strikes back saying that's not enough. Having federal claims doesn't automatically make California law apply. It's a mismatch of jurisdiction, and it can't be glued together after the fact. Her retaliation claims her harassment allegations and her failure to supervise counts all fall under California statutes, and those can't be carried into New York courtrooms unless the law explicitly allows it, which it doesn't. So suddenly her carefully constructed narrative starts to fracture under the weight of procedural law, and Fritz keeps going, pointing out that she's already been given multiple chances to fix this. She's filed her complaint, her first amended version, and now her second. But the issues are still there, uncorrected, unchanged, undeniable. He reminds the court that this pattern shows she's not just facing unfair circumstances, she's the one creating them. Because every amendment, every motion, every dramatic filing is her own choice, and each choice brings new deadlines, new responses, and new risks. So when she tells the court she needs more time because she's busy with discovery, he flips that argument completely on its head. He says discovery has nothing to do with this motion, because this motion isn't about evidence or witnesses. It's about what's written in her own words on her own pages, in her own pleadings. Everything needed for the judge to decide is already right there in black and white. He even highlights how granting her delay wouldn't save time. It would waste it, because if the judge rules, now the case will actually be simplified and streamlined, making future stages like summary judgment easier and shorter. And he's right, because if this motion succeeds, some of her biggest claims could be wiped off the board before trial ever begins, and that would narrow the fight dramatically. But Fritz isn't done. He points to how Blake's behavior in this litigation has been anything but consistent. He reminds the court that she and her husband have repeatedly filed sanctions motions against Wayfarer, even while discovery was ongoing, never once agreeing to delay anything when it benefited the other side. And now suddenly when the tables turn, she's asking for extra time. He calls that hypocrisy pure and simple. And in a subtle way, that's exactly the word that hits the air. Even if he doesn't say it directly, he's showing the court that fairness cuts both ways. And if she demanded strict adherence to deadlines before, she can't abandon them now when it's convenient. What's truly remarkable is how calm his tone remains through it all. Methodical, strategic, precise. He's not angry, he's building a case brick by brick, line by line, showing the judge that this isn't about emotion, it's about order. It's about who's following the rules and who isn't. And by the time you finish reading it, you realize that every argument Blake made for an extension seems to collapse under its own logic. The longer she waits, the more it looks like she's avoiding something, not preparing for it. And that's the quiet danger that runs through this entire motion. The possibility that the delay is not about time. It's about strategy, about stalling, about buying one last chance to repair something that may already be beyond repair. The next turn in this unfolding legal drama feels like a storm building beneath the surface, and Kevin Fritz is standing right at the center of it, refusing to let Blake Lively or her team reshape the narrative this time, because as the filings move deeper into the record, he starts addressing not just the technical failures, but the very structure of her claims. And when he does, the effect is chilling. He explains that a motion for judgment on the pleadings is not some desperate move by the defense. It's a necessary safeguard to expose when a complaint doesn't even meet the legal minimums required to stand. And he points out with precision that every major claim Blake has raised, from sexual harassment to retaliation to aiding and abetting under California law, fails. For one crucial reason: they do not apply outside California. And she filed this entire case in New York. The legal foundation simply does not hold. He tells the judge that when she filed under California law, she tethered herself to a jurisdiction she doesn't have. And the way he writes it, you can feel the pressure mounting, because that's not an argument of opinion. It's fact, and it's one the court cannot ignore. He continues that the very letters required to sue under the Civil Rights Division were missing from her filings, and that even her second amended complaint still doesn't attach them or reference their dates. The silence of those missing documents is louder than any argument she could make. And this is where the suspense builds, because you can imagine the courtroom as the judge reads this and realizes that the case file doesn't contain the basic certification that gives her permission to be there. Fritz then strikes, again highlighting that none of her evidence changes that fact. He says no matter what discovery reveals, no matter what documents or witnesses she produces, it cannot fix what wasn't done in the beginning, because these are defects on the face of her pleadings, and that means they can be judged right now without waiting for trial, without waiting for summary judgment, without waiting for anything. And as that line lands, you realize that this could end far sooner than anyone expected. Drives home that she cannot simply say she will amend again to fix things, because she's already amended twice. She has had her second and third chances, and the court's patience is not infinite. Every amendment brings the expectation that the errors will be corrected, but here they are, again, unchanged, unaddressed, unresolved. And that's when he turns the argument back toward efficiency, because if this motion is granted now, the case will shrink dramatically. Fewer claims, fewer witnesses, fewer filings, less chaos. And that is exactly what the rule was designed to do: to simplify, to focus, to narrow. And that makes his position almost impossible to refute. Blake, on the other hand, has argued that granting the motion now would disrupt the timeline and delay the trial, But Fritz calmly dismantles that too. He reminds the judge that the trial isn't scheduled until March 2026, that fact discovery is ongoing, that there are no summary judgment motions yet filed, and that every court, in similar cases, has allowed a Rule 12c motion even late in the process, sometimes even after summary judgment has begun. He's showing that her argument isn't about timing, it's about avoidance, and this makes everything she's asking for look less like a request for fairness and more like a tactic to delay the inevitable. He even calls back to the fact that when Wayfarer asked for extensions earlier in the case, Blake refused every single time she wanted to move things forward. Then, she wanted the judge to punish them for missing filing windows. And now when it's her turn to meet a deadline, she wants grace, leniency, understanding, and the quiet irony in that hits hard because it paints a picture of inconsistency that no judge wants to see in a plaintiff's pattern of behavior. The most striking part comes when he shifts to the missed request to admit deadlines, the moment that really reveals just how off course her case might be. He lays out that those requests were supposed to be served by August 14th and that no one extended that deadline. No one even asked to extend it. Yet she failed to serve them and only weeks later came to the court asking for relief. He argues that this is not good, cause this is not a small oversight. This is a critical procedural misstep and the court should deny it. He explains that the entire purpose of those requests is to narrow the factual issues before summary judgment, to define what's agreed upon and what's not. And if she didn't even meet that step, it's like walking into trial without a map. It's chaos. And he subtly reminds the judge that this isn't a one-time accident. This is part of a pattern, a chain of late filings and missed notices that undermine her credibility with every passing motion, and even more revealing is what he says next about her newly proposed damages. Because less than 2 weeks before expert reports were due, Blake introduced an entirely new theory of lost profits, a claim that completely changed the nature of her damages and caught the defense off guard. Fritz argues that this late shift forces their experts to reanalyze everything, and that the court should allow the schedule to adjust so both sides can complete discovery properly. It's a reasonable ask, and one that shows Wayfarer's side is not trying to stall. They're trying to make sure the case is organized, but he knows Blake won't agree. She never does, even when the benefit is mutual, because it seems her strategy relies on keeping the process as chaotic as possible to maintain pressure, to maintain control. But Fritz is ready for that. He lays out a revised schedule that keeps the March 2026 trial date intact, while giving everyone more time to complete the necessary work. It's practical, fair, and well argued, and yet there's that underlying tension that maybe she still won't accept it, because accepting order means losing momentum, and that's the heartbeat of this case. The constant push and pull between structure and chaos, between calm legal logic and fiery courtroom drama, between rules and rebellion. And Fritz is showing the judge which side he's on. He ends that section with a chillingly simple statement that her failure to provide good cause, her repeated disregard for procedure, and her new last-minute theories all show one thing: she's not being stonewalled, she's stalling. And as you read those words, you can feel the weight of them, because this isn't just a critique of a legal move, it's a statement on her entire litigation conduct, a quiet accusation that maybe this case was never meant to win. It was meant to survive, to delay, to stretch, and to outlast. And now that survival tactic is running out of road, because this motion forces the court to decide whether the case itself even belongs here, or if it's time to end it before it ever reaches trial. And just when you think Fritz might have said everything he could, he goes one layer deeper, addressing what he calls her self-inflicted chaos. He shows that every one of her current problems comes directly from her own decisions. She chose to amend her complaint. She chose to bring in new parties. She chose to file new theories of damages, and every choice triggered new deadlines, new filings, new legal requirements, and every one of them was foreseeable. Nothing blindsided her. Nothing came out of nowhere. The motion she's now fighting against is a result of her own strategy. And that's where the suspense tightens, because now the judge has to ask the one question no one wants to face: did she do this to herself? Did she build this tangled web only to find herself trapped in it? And if the answer is yes, then no amount of extensions or explanations will change what's written in the record. That's the quiet, devastating truth behind Kevin Fritz's response. It's not angry, it's not emotional, it's methodical. It's the slow turning of a lock on a door that might be closing forever, and as the hearing approaches, you can almost feel the silence of anticipation. What will the judge do? Will the motion be granted? Will parts of Blake's case be dismissed before she even reaches trial? Or will the court give her one more chance to amend to delay to breathe for just a little longer? And with each passing moment, that question looms larger over everything, waiting for an answer that could change the course of the entire battle. The pressure surrounding this case now feels almost cinematic. Every filing, every rebuttal, every footnote turning into another twist in a story that refuses to calm down. And as Kevin Fritz pushes deeper into the record, his strategy becomes clearer. He's not just fighting a case, he's building a narrative of control structure and legal precision, while the other side scrambles to keep pace. He reminds the court that Blake Lively's repeated amendments have turned the process into a maze, where she keeps trying to redraw the map every time she hits a wall, and that by doing so, she has stretched the patience of the system itself. He lays out that her second amended complaint filed in late July was a choice, not a necessity. She could have left the earlier version in place, but she didn't. She reopened the door to new motions, new challenges, and new scrutiny, and now she's facing the consequences of that choice. It's not malice, it's law, and as he explains it, you begin to see the larger picture that this case might have been doomed by its own ambition from the start. The more she tried to expand it, the more fragile it became, and Fritz seizes on that fragility, pointing out that her claims reach far beyond what her legal filings can support. He calls attention to the exhaustion requirement under both state and federal law, how every person bringing a civil rights claim must have first completed the administrative process and received the right to sue letter before ever stepping foot in court, and how Blake skipped that step not once, but multiple times. The implication is staggering because without that notice, the claims have no standing. They're legally hollow. And when Fritz writes that no right to sue letter was ever attached to her complaint or entered into evidence, you can almost feel the silence in the courtroom because that omission is not small. It's everything he's showing the judge, that the very gate to the courthouse was never opened for her, and if that's true, then everything that followed might not even belong here. He doesn't accuse, he doesn't sensationalize, he just documents fact after fact, laying them like stones on a path that only leads one way to dismissal. And it's that quiet, steady confidence that makes this response feel like a masterclass in control. While her team's filings read as urgent, emotional, filled with appeals to fairness and circumstance, his response feels surgical. He cuts through arguments that she's been treated unfairly by reminding the court that she's the one who brought the case into this jurisdiction. She's the one who mixed state and federal claims without proper authorization. She's the one who keeps adjusting her allegations as deadlines close. And each move she makes to repair the damage only opens new vulnerabilities. He cites case after case, showing that these types of defects cannot be cured by amendment, and that once jurisdiction is lacking, it cannot be created after the fact. And that line lands like a final warning, because if the judge agrees with that reasoning, then her case doesn't just weaken, it collapses entirely. He continues to highlight that discovery, the process, she claims is overwhelming. Her has no bearing on this motion, because the motion is confined to the face of the pleadings, not external evidence. It doesn't matter what she's found or who she's deposed or what new story she's uncovered. None of it can rewrite what's already been filed. And that subtle truth makes the argument devastatingly simple, because it takes away her strongest defense, the plea for more time, and replaces it with cold procedural logic. Fritz also takes a moment to show how granting this motion would actually save the court time, not waste it. He walks the judge through what happens next. If the motion is granted, the weaker claims will be removed, the issues will narrow, the discovery will shrink, and the trial will focus only on what remains. And if that happens, it will make every step that follows more efficient, less costly, and more precise. He even points out that judges in similar federal cases have granted these motions at much later stages, sometimes even after partial summary judgments, and that doing so never prejudiced the plaintiff. It only clarified the issues for everyone involved. It's an argument that balances fairness with efficiency, and it's hard to ignore because it gives the court a logical path forward without delay. As the response continues, he starts weaving in the broader narrative of fairness, how every time Wayfarer requested an extension earlier in the process, Blake refused, and now she's demanding. That same courtesy, the contrast is striking and deliberate. It paints a portrait of inconsistency that judges are trained to notice. He recalls how she filed multiple sanctions motions even as discovery was active, forcing the defense to respond on short deadlines without complaint, and now claims she cannot possibly manage this one motion because of discovery demands. He lets the inconsistency speak for itself. And it does louder than any accusation could. The tone of his writing is calm, but it carries the sharpness of precision, every line serving a purpose, every reference reinforcing the same message that rules must apply equally to everyone, and that if she wants fairness, she must live by the same standard she imposed on others. But then he turns toward something even more subtle. The question of why her team missed critical deadlines like the requests for admission, which were meant to be served in August, and which they ignored until long after the deadline had passed. He doesn't mock it, he just states the timeline clearly, and reminds the court that deadlines are not suggestions. They are binding parts of the judicial order, and that no explanation has been offered for why that step was missed, especially since depositions and discovery did not prevent her from sending them. The court's silence on that point will say everything, and you can almost feel the courtroom tension as those words are read, because missed deadlines aren't minor. They're reflections of control and preparation, and in a high-stakes case like this, it's a detail that carries weight. And then just as you think the filing might slow down, he drops another twist. He reveals that less than 2 weeks before expert reports were due, Blake's team introduced a completely new theory of damages, a claim for lost profits that hadn't been part of any earlier filings. This sudden shift forces the defense to reevaluate everything, to bring in experts to reassess damages, to reanalyze evidence. And that means more time, more expense, and more uncertainty. But Fritz doesn't use it to complain. He uses it to propose a new schedule, a practical one with updated deadlines for expert reports, rebuttals, and depositions while keeping the trial date intact. It's measured and logical, and it puts the ball back in her court to agree or refuse. Because either way, it shows the judge who's working to keep the case orderly and who's complicating it. The contrast is powerful, the subtext clear. Wayfarer is following structure. Blake is creating chaos, and the court must now choose which side of that balance to trust. He ends the section by reminding the judge that granting this motion won't delay justice, it will preserve it, that dismissing claims that were never properly filed doesn't harm the system. It protects it, and that every argument Blake has made for more time is built on choices she made herself. The dramatic irony is impossible to ignore, because the same ambition that made her file this case so boldly is the same force now working against her. And as Fritz closes his argument, the suspense tightens like a held breath. Will the judge side with the calm order of the law or with the chaos of emotion? And delay the answer will decide not just the case, but perhaps the entire narrative that's been playing out for months in filings, headlines, and whispers behind courtroom doors. In the end, what this moment truly represents is a collision between ambition and accountability, a battle between the image of control and the cold mechanics of the law. Blake Lively entered this courtroom not just as a celebrity, but as a plaintiff determined to rewrite her own narrative, yet somewhere between the headlines and the hearings. She collided with a system that doesn't bend to personality. It only answers to proof. Kevin Fritz understood that from the beginning. His filings aren't dramatic, they're deliberate, each paragraph, a quiet dismantling of a story that once seemed unstoppable. And that's what makes this case so extraordinary. Because beyond the fame, the strategy, and the noise lies a simple truth. The law demands structure, it demands discipline. And when that's ignored, the consequences are merciless. What began as a high-profile defamation and retaliation suit has become a mirror reflecting the difference between perception and precision, between what people think the courts will allow and what they actually enforce. And if the judge accepts Fritz's reasoning, this could end not with a fiery courtroom showdown, but with a single order quietly closing the door on months of spectacle, leaving behind a trail of filings, motions, and lessons about how even the most powerful names can find themselves undone not by scandal, but by the paperwork they neglected. This ending isn't explosive, it's procedural. But in that simplicity lies the real drama, because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It whispers in the form of a dismissal order stamped and signed and final,